What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Who Wants to Brawl YouTube channel. That is not a question, that is a statement. My name is Who, and I'm letting you know I want to brawl. Here, we're all about the Magic format Brawl, specifically in regards to Magic Arena, so we don't have to worry about budget, we only have to worry about wildcards.
Today we have a commander review video. On these videos I go over all of the commanders in a new set when a new set comes out. All of the non-commanders from the set I will be talking about in a separate video, but today we're focusing exclusively on the commanders, and with that, let's get started. Alright, first up we have Halvar, God of Battle, which is a 4-mana 4/4 and gives creatures we control that are enchanted or equipped double strike, and at the beginning of each combat we may attach target aura or equipment attached to a creature we control to target creature we control. On the flip side, being a double-faced modal card, it is Sword of the Realms, which is 2 mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and Vigilance, and when equipped creature dies, you return it to your hand, and you can equip for 2 mana. As a commander, I like this a lot. It gives a lot of flexibility. You can take it the aura route, you can take it the equipment route, and then when it's an equipment, you don't have to worry about your creatures permanently dying because you can just bounce them right back to your hand. I can see this being a very aggressive commander and a very fun one to play. Also keep in mind, the commander attacks applies to either face of this card you cast. So if you cast it as an equipment first, you will have to pay 6 to cast it as a creature. If you cast it as a creature first for 4 mana, you can then cast it as an equipment for 4 mana. Overall, I like this a lot. It gives a lot of interesting interactions, and it is an overall interesting card design. And then we have Magden, Brazen Outlaw. It is a legendary creature, Dwarf Berserker. It gives other dwarves we control +1/+0. And then whenever a dwarf we control becomes tapped, we create a treasure token. Then we can sack 5 treasures to search our library for an artifact or dragon, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle our library. Okay, I like this card a lot. This is one of my personal favorite commanders that has come out in a long time. I don't know how good it's going to be as a commander in Brawl, because it's going to rely heavily on the dwarfs that are in this set. However, if the dwarfs in this set are viable in Brawl, this is going to be an immensely fun commander to play. It is interesting design space in that I don't think I've ever seen a Lord have the payoffs for this creature type quite like Magden. You could take this in the vehicle direction, you could take this in an aggro direction and tap your dwarves that way, you can take this in the direction of tutoring out artifacts, you could take this in the direction of just using your treasure as ramp, and you could take this in a dragon direction, or any combination thereof. This is going to be an immensely fun commander to play. I don't really think, other than the dwarves, you're going to see a deck that plays exactly the same. There's too many ways to take this to be just another generic Brawl commander. I like this card a lot. And then we have Kaya, the Inexorable, which is a 5-mana planeswalker, 3, a white and a black. It says put a ghost counter on up to 1 target non-token creature. These can be yours or your opponent's. It gains when this creature dies or is put into exile, return it to its owner's hand, and put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And then for -3, we can exile a non-land permanent. And then it has an ultimate with you get an emblem. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, from your graveyard, or from among cards you own in exile without paying its mana cost. This seems just like a generically good planeswalker that could be a commander. The 5 mana to exile anything is a steep price. All planeswalkers essentially come with a fog effect if they want to attack into the planeswalker to remove it, so that's damage you don't take. Always useful, always underrated about planeswalkers. The ultimate requires a little bit of a build around, but there are definitely enough legendary permanents in Brawl, in white and black, to make that viable. Let's see, you have Rankle, which can sacrifice itself already. But overall, I think the best way to build this deck is to use creatures that remove your opponent's creatures to really take advantage of that +1. So you have cards like Rankle again, that can make your opponent stack creatures and you stack creatures. Again, that has synergy with the ultimate as well. You have cards like Skyclave Apparition, which exiles a non-token permanent you don't control with CMC 4 or less when it enters the battlefield. And just a lot of cards like that can really take full advantage of that +1 ability. I like this. There's some cool design space in there, but I'm not in love with it. I think I'll have to see how it plays out. Next up we have Raindane, God of the Worthy, which is 2 and a white for a 2/3 flying vigilance god that says snow lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost 4 or greater cost 2 colorless more to cast. And then on the back side, it's a legendary artifact for 3 and a white. It says if a source an opponent controls will deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent 1 of that damage. And then whenever you or another permanent we control become the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell unless its controller pays 1 colorless. So I like the thought of this card. Each one taxes your opponent in a different way, making combat harder by preventing damage, making big spells harder to cast by having them cost 2 or more, targeting your stuff by having that spell cost 1 colorless more gets countered, etc., etc. Unfortunately for this card, all of the abilities are just narrow enough that I don't think they quite impact the board enough for the mana investment. Affecting only snowlands, affecting only non-creature spells with converted mana cost 4 or greater, only preventing 1 damage instead of 2, forcing your opponent to pay 1 colorless more. It's gonna more be annoying than actually game breaking, and therefore I think this is better run in the deck than as your commander, because in the deck you can play it in the right situation to foil your opponent's plans. Unfortunately, as a commander, I just don't think it does enough. That's my opinion. I might be horribly wrong with this one. This is one that I'm not confident my analysis is going to be really good on. We'll have to wait and see. But for now, I'm not super excited to run this as a commander. Here we have Sigrid, God Favored, which is 3 mana for a 2/2. It has Flash and First Strike, protection from god creatures. Then when it enters the battlefield, exile to 1 target attacking or blocking creature until it leaves the battlefield. I don't know how good of a commander this will be because a lot of the effectiveness of this card is flashing it in when your opponent isn't expecting it, and that's gone when your opponent sees it sitting in the command zone. But it is a very useful card, and I can see it going in the deck of a lot of white decks, but I don't see it being a very efficient commander. The protection from gods is very nice because there are some gods running around as commanders, and with this set there's going to be even more. You can blow out an opponent if they attack with 2 creatures and one of them is an X2. But all of the plus side on this card is really when your opponent isn't expecting it, and you can't do that when it's in the command zone. So play this in the deck, don't play it as... Next up we have Alrund, God of the Cosmos, which is a double-face modal card with Haka, Whispering Raven. As Alrund, it's a 5 mana for a 1/1 god, solid start already, and it gets +1/+1 for each card in our hand and each Foretold card we own in exile. Then at the beginning of our end step, choose a card type, then reveal the top 2 cards of our library and put all cards of the chosen type into our hand and the rest on bottom in any order. And then, as Haka, it's 2 mana for a 2/3 flyer that when it deals combat damage, we return it to our hand and scry 2. I like the design on this card a lot. As a commander, you're probably going to play it as Haka, swing in for some flying damage, and then cast it later as Alrund with a full hand later in the game. Also, because of the Scry 2, you're setting up your hand to have more card draw cards, and Scry always gets you to what you need faster. I like the design of this a lot. I think it's the perfect power level. I don't think it's overpowered, but I also think it's pretty solid. I like the fact that Alrund not only gets +1/+1 for each card in our hand, but also can add to our hand with that second ability. And I like that it happens at our end step and not our upkeep. Solid card. I like it a lot. I could see this being a pretty fun commander to build around. Next up, we have Cosima, God of the Voyage, which is 3 mana for a 2/4 god that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may exile Cosima. If you do, it gains whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If Cosima is exiled, you may put a Voyage counter on it. If you don't, return it to the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters on it and draw X cards, where X is the number of Voyage counters on it. And then it's also a double-face modal card, with the back half being 2 mana for a 3/3 legendary artifact vehicle that says whenever a vehicle we control deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles that many cards from the top of their library. You may play land cards from among those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and has crew 1. So this is a really, really interesting commander. I don't think I've ever seen anything like this in Magic. The landfall trigger it gives when it's exiled is bizarre. I like it a lot. I gotta be honest with everyone. I don't know how to analyze this or how I would abuse this. It is pretty rough paying 3 mana and then immediately exiling the creature. But I can see in the later game this absolutely being devastating. I think the best place to play this at the moment would be in an Ashiok deck. They tend to be heavy on the control. So if you could put this out on turn 3 and then still have a board presence where you're in control and just exile it and let it build up its value, I could see this being really, really powerful. And then on the backside, it also goes with the Ashiok because most Ashiok decks want to exile. And this just essentially mills out your opponent and ensures you get your lands. Also, Ashiok puts the creatures onto the battlefield to crew it, so I can see this being a must in an Ashiok deck. But on its own, I don't know how good of a commander this will be. I'm definitely going to try it, and I'm definitely interested to see how it plays. But yeah, like I said, this is a weird one. This one has me stumped. I'm excited. This is an A+ design from me, Wizards. Well done. Next we have Inga, Rune Eyes, which is 4 mana for a 3/3 human wizard that when it enters the battlefield we scry 3, and when it dies we draw 3 cards if 3 or more creatures died this turn. This feels like it would be much more of a useful limited card than a commander card. I don't see this getting much play. I certainly don't see it being run as a commander. It doesn't do enough. 4 mana for a 3/3 is not great. It doesn't do enough when it enters the battlefield. And its dies trigger is pretty weird to try to set off, especially in mono blue. I don't see this being a commander at all. I can see it being used in the decks of some wizard decks. Scry 3 is never bad to set up your next draws. And if you have other colors, particularly probably red, if you want to go a wizard route, its second ability won't be quite as difficult to set off. And if you can pull that off, that is a lot of card advantage. Next up we have Orvar, the All-Form, which is 3 generic and a blue for a 3/3 shapeshifter. It has Changeling. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. Then, when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. So if you're running this as a commander, the second ability is only going to trigger if this gets bounced back to your hand and then an opponent causes you to discard it. Not very likely to happen. That first ability is where things get interesting though. There are only a handful of cards in this Brawl format that target a creature you control with a positive effect. This includes an instant or sorcery that creates a copy, a bounce spell in order to save your creature, or a spell that gives your creature hexproof. I'm not sure if there is enough of those to make this a consistently viable commander. However, if you do try this, and you pull off the combo with one of those cards, it's going to feel amazing. Unfortunately, I just don't think there's enough of those cards in this current Brawl format to make this a viable commander. I think this should be left to actual commander players, not Brawl. So next up we have Aegon, God of Death, which is 3 mana for a 6/6 Death Touch, legendary creature god, which at the beginning of our upkeep, exile 2 cards from our graveyard If we can't, sack Aegon and draw a card. And it's also a double-faced modal card that the back half is a 1-mana legendary artifact called Throne of Death that says at the beginning of our upkeep, mill a card, and then for 3 mana, tapping it and exiling a creature card from our graveyard, we can draw a card. So holy smokes, the first half of this card is insane. And I'm so thankful that the current Brawl format is loaded with efficient removal, because I can see this running an absolute train in Brawl if there wasn't good removal. 3 mana for a 6/6 Death Touch, with downside that's definitely there, but not that hard to play into, and even if you can't, you get upside. It seems like I'm missing something on the balance scale here. It seems like this card was too good. As for the artifact half, the first card you draw is 4 mana and exiling a creature. That seems like a steep price. However, if you're in a self-mill deck, I don't see why you wouldn't run this as a 1 mana mill a card every turn. That seems like you can get a lot of value with that over the course of a game. But yeah, Aegon just seems like he could be really, really powerful. It's kind of all there is to say about this. Oh, also, I like that this is a play on Hela. It's pretty fun. So next up, we have Tergrid, God of Fright, which is 5 mana for a 4/5 menace, legendary creature god, that says whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And it's also a double-faced modal card with Tergrid's Lantern, which is 4 mana for an artifact that says tap, target player loses 3 life unless they sack a non-land permanent or discard a card. And for 4 mana, you can untap it. So this card is really, really mean on its own and can become a very, very useful commander and very combo-tastic commander on its own. But I honestly think the best use for this card is pairing it in the deck with Rankle. And all it takes is 1 attack with Rankle with this on the battlefield, and you probably win. This card is absolutely nuts. People are not going to like you when they see this hit the table, but that's fine. We're playing one-on-one. The point is to beat the other person. And when this hits the battlefield, you're going to win a lot of games. Now, 90% of the time, I see this being played as the creature. But the artifact half of this, if you're allowed to untap, I can see absolutely devastating your opponent. But you have to be comfortable enough to play it and not see a situation where the creature half of this is a better play. I don't see that coming up often, but when it does, I do still like the artifact half. I would get ready to see this card a lot going forward. Yeah, people are definitely going to be running it as a commander. So, sorry in advance. Also, sorry in advance if you play against my Rankle deck and this hits the battlefield. Yeah, that's going to happen. Next up, we have Valki, God of Lies, which is 2 mana for a 2/1 god that when it enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card revealed this way until Valki leaves the battlefield. And then for X mana, choose a creature card exiled with Valki with converted mana cost X, and Valki becomes a copy of it. It's also a double-faced modal card where on the back we have Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, which is 7 mana for a planeswalker that says when it enters the battlefield, you get an emblem with you may play cards exiled with Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, and we may spend mana as though they were mana of any color to cast those cards. And then it has a +2 of exile the top card of each player's library. It has a -3 of exile target artifact or creature, and a -8 of exit all cards from all graveyards and add 3 red to our mana pool. So this is a really interesting card in terms of it being a commander. I think you have to plan your deck around one of the 2 sides of the card. I don't think there's much synergy between them. If you play Valki on turn 2, you're probably never going to get to the 9 mana to play Tybalt. I suppose if you play Tybalt and then want to play Valki, you can do that, but its ability won't work with itself, I don't think. I don't know the rulings on that one. But either way, Valki is an interesting card design. I like the way it's supposed to be Loki. Taking a creature from their hand could be very useful, but also could be a complete dud if it doesn't work with what your deck wants to do. I like the Tybalt version of this much more, even though it is 7 mana. So you're probably going to look at a control deck with this, but all of its abilities are really good when paired with that emblem that you automatically get, and I think that's a really interesting, cool design. Also, it's nice to see Tybalt come back in a relevant form. Next up, we have Varaggoth, Bloodsky Sire, which is 3 mana for a 2/3 Death Touch, which has Boast, which means whenever it attacks, we can pay 2 mana, target player searches their library for a card, shuffles their library, and puts it on top. I don't particularly love this as a commander. I think there are better black legendary creatures to build around. However, I can see this going in just about all of them. It's a very useful card, being able to tutor up whatever you want. I suppose if you want to run a very specific combo involving only black cards, this would be the commander for you. Other than that, I do think it's a good card to have in the deck, just not great as a commander. It does have an attack trigger, and having Death Touch with an attack trigger is guaranteed at least a 1-for-1, so not great, not terrible either though. Next up we have Arni Broken Brow, which is 3 mana for a 3/3 human berserker. It has haste and boast, which means you can activate this ability only once each turn and only if this creature attacked this turn. And its boast is for 1 mana, you may change its power to 1 plus the greatest power among other creatures you control. So this is a weird card. I don't see it being played as a commander. I do see it putting in a lot of work in a Purphoros deck though. You could cheat out large creatures easily with Purphoros, and then for 1 mana making this card's power that much more seems like it could be worth it. But I don't see this being played as a commander. It's too narrow. It takes too much to get going and doesn't have enough of a payoff. It's an interesting card though. Next up we have Birgi, God of Storytelling, which is 3 mana for a 3/3 god that whenever you cast a spell, add 1 red to your mana pool. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. And then creatures you control can boast twice during each of your turns rather than once. It's also a double-faced modal card, and on the back it's Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, which is 4 in a red for a legendary artifact that says discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library, you may play those cards this turn. So this is a really powerful card. I don't think I need to say that in order for you to know that, but it's nice to hear out loud. Getting 1 red back whenever you cast a spell allows for some seriously explosive turns. If you can give your creatures haste, or pump all that mana into a large burn spell, Birgi can do a lot of damage in a hurry. The allowing your creatures to boast twice is a pretty nice bonus if you're going to use some of the cards that have boast, but I don't think those cards are going to be the primary focus of the deck. This is going to be a borderline Storm Commander in the current Brawl format. The only negative to casting it as a god is in mono red, you're probably going to run out of cards real quick, so you're going to want to make sure you have something like Valka Exploration to in a way refill your hand and keep giving you gas. But other than that, that's a powerful card. It's also nice that if you cast it as a creature first, you burn out your hand, and then when it gets removed, you could play it as the back half to add more fuel to the fire and cast more things. This is a powerful commander. I like it a lot, and I definitely can't wait to see what people do with it. Alright, next up we have Thor, God of Hammers. Excuse me, no, that's not right. We have Toralf, God of Fury, which is 4 mana for a 4/4 Trampler, legendary creature god, that whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, Toralf deals damage equal to the excess amount to any target other than that permanent. And then it's also a double-faced modal card, which on the back half we have Toralf's Hammer. There's another Thor joke in there. Which is 2 mana for a legendary artifact equipment that says equipped creature has 2 mana, tap, unattached Toralf's Hammer. It deals 3 damage to any target. Return Toralf's Hammer to its owner's hand. Equipped creature gets +3/+0 if it's legendary, and it equips for 2 mana. So as a direct damage player, I cannot begin to tell you how much I love this card. I don't think the words can do my feelings for this card justice. I like what Wizards is doing, playing with the excess amount of damage. That's space they have never really explored before, and it started back with Flame Spill and Ikoria. And to see it continue here is just wonderful. It can really push red a little bit further on the direct damage scale. Not that one-on-one red needs it, but still, it's fun. And then the equipment half of this is not exactly the most efficient, but I do like that the hammer can come back to your hand and then you can play it as Toralf. That's also a way to get around the commander tax. If you play it as the hammer and then bounce it back to your hand, casting Toralf from your hand excludes all of the previous times you cast it, meaning there is no commander tax for this time that you cast it. The +3/+0 if the creature is legendary is a really nice touch. I like this card a lot. I can't wait to play with it. Any card that increases your damage output is this card's best friend. I don't know if this is the commander that's going to see play or it's still going to be Torbrand and this is in the deck, but either way, if this is the commander, Torbrand will be in the deck, and if Torbrand's the commander, this will be in the deck. They kind of go hand in hand. If there's a 1/1, a 3/3, and a 5/5 on the table, one shock can take out all three of those with Torbrand and this on the table, and that is kind of nuts to me. Really fun card, and I like this new space that Wizards is designing cards in. Next up we have Iska, God of the Tree, which is 3 mana for a 1/4 legendary creature god. It has vigilance and tap to add 1 mana of any color, and it gives other legendary creatures we control vigilance and tap to add 1 mana of any color. It is also a double-faced modal card, and on the back it is white, blue, black, red, green for a legendary enchantment that says, at the beginning of our upkeep, reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on bottom of your library in a random order. So this card is very mixed depending on which side you cast it as. As a creature, the best part about this is it gives our other legendary creatures vigilance. We do have to build around it a little bit for other legendary creatures, but it's pretty good. It's nothing special. However, the enchantment part of this is absolutely absurd, and you can build a crazy good deck with this. Right off the bat, I'm immediately thinking of a deck that only has 1 or 2 creatures or planeswalkers you want to cast, and just an absolute 5-color control deck. That would probably be the most powerful way to build this, but a fun way is just load it up with some of your favorite creatures and go. It's all 5 colors, and there's a good mana base in Brawl right now. This could be an extremely fun deck to build. Alright, next up we have Finn the Fangbearer, which is 2 mana for a 1/3 Death Touch. It's a human warrior that says, whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. So in doing research for this commander, I searched how many previous cards there are with Death Touch that could go in this deck, and there's only 5 cards with Death Touch that are in this Brawl format before this set is printed. I don't think that's enough for this commander to work. I really, really like the design, and I hope there's enough Kaldeheim cards with Death Touch to make this work. I'm hesitant though because there's so few before it, so I don't see this getting much play right now. Maybe in a black-green deck where there's more Death Touch creatures and this can go in the deck versus as the commander. Let's hope WotC prints a lot more mono-green Death Touch creatures in the next 2 sets, and hopefully it'll be viable in the coming months. Next up we have Jorn, God of Winter, which is 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary snow creature god that whenever it attacks, untap each snow permanent you control. And it's also a double-faced modal card, with the back half being Caldring, the Rime Staff, which is 3 mana for a snow artifact. It says, tap, you may play target snow permanent from your graveyard this turn. If you do, it enters the battlefield tapped. Okay, this is an extremely powerful commander. I like that it's 3 colors. Whenever it attacks, you untap each snow permanent you control, which means you untap him and you untap all of your lands. Now for those of you that play Commander, you'll know that untapping your lands is one of the most powerful things you can do, and just about every single card that untaps your lands at some point sees a lot of play and shoots up in price. We mainly deal with Magic Arena here, so we don't really deal with price. But you'll know that these are all really powerful. So the creature part of this is going to see a lot of play, and it's going to get you a lot of mileage. As for the back half of this card, playing snow permanents from your graveyard will always help you get more value out of your cards. Reusing cards sometimes can be just as good as drawing a card, especially if you're putting it onto the battlefield and not just back into your hand. So this card is really good. I like this a lot as a commander, and you're definitely going to see a lot of this card. So next up we have Kolvori, God of Kinship, which is 4 mana for a 2/4 that as long as we control 3 or more legendary creatures, it gets +4/+2 in Vigilance. And then for 2 mana and tapping it, we can look at the top 6 cards of our library. We may reveal a legendary creature card from among them and put it in our hand, put the rest on bottom of our library in a random order. And then it is also a double-face modal card, and on the back side, it is 2 mana for a legendary artifact that when it enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type, and then it taps for a green, and we can spend this only to cast creature spells of the chosen type or a legendary creature spell. So 2 mana ramp is always the ramp that you want, especially with a 4 mana commander or a lot of creatures. You want to get creatures out as quickly as possible, and ramping on turn 2 allows you to do that a little bit more efficiently. But other than that, there's not much to say about the back half of this card. The front half is where things get interesting. I don't know how good of a commander this card will be, just because I'm not entirely sure how many legendary creatures that are mono green there are that synergize well to make an efficient deck. But this is certainly an interesting card with an interesting design, and if you have a lot of legendary creatures in your deck, you should find a slot for this in your deck. Again though, it all depends on how many legendary creatures you're running. Next up we have Toski, Bearer of Secrets, which is a 4 mana 1/1 that can be countered. It's indestructible, making it difficult to get rid of. It attacks each combat if able, and then whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. This is a very powerful card and a very powerful commander that I don't really like at all. It kind of feels like a very lazy card design. Like Wizards was like, hey, let's take something 98% of decks do already and just reward them for doing what they're already doing by letting them draw a card. And then people at Wizards was like, but we already have a blue enchantment in Standard that does that. And then the person designing this card was like, hey, well, let's make it a lot more difficult to deal with by making it uncounterable and indestructible. It's a very good card. I like it much more in the actual deck than I like it in the command zone. Like I said, it's powerful. I'm just not in love with it. That's just my opinion. A lot of people probably aren't going to agree with me, but yeah, this one doesn't excite me. Green already has a lot of things that draw cards. It doesn't really need another one, and especially doesn't need one sitting in the command zone. So that's all I'm going to say on Toski. Very powerful card. Next up we have Tavar Kel, which is a 4 mana planeswalker that starts with 3 loyalty and has a static ability that says elves we control have tap, add a black to our mana pool. And then it has a +1 of put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target elf, untap it, and it gains Death Touch. For 0 loyalty, we can create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. And for -6, you get an emblem with whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn, and you draw 2 cards. So right off the top, it is worth noting that this is a green-black commander because of that static ability. Now this card in particular has some upside because some cards deal with getting Tavar or Elf cards into your hand. I'm not sure if you get any bonuses of that for this being your commander, but it is a good card and the commander you'll probably want if you want to build a black-green elf deck. But other than that, really, it's just a good elf commander. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's okay. And now we have Vorinclex, Monstrous Rider, which is 4 mana for a 6/6 trample haste Phyrexian Praetor. If we would put 1 or more counters on a permanent we control, instead put twice that many on that permanent. And if an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent they control, put half of that, rounded down instead. This is an absolute monster of a card. It definitely requires a build around, but it is very easy to do. It goes in any deck that already deals with counters of any kind. So cards like Grakmaw, Vorinclex, any deck that has a planeswalker as a commander, it goes in. This is an absolute engine for all of your cards. Its second ability, however, might be even nastier. It completely shuts down so many cards. All of those cards that I mentioned it goes with, it also completely neuters them. Planeswalkers are virtually unplayable with this. Anything that enters the battlefield with +1/+1 counters won't even be worth playing against as well. That second ability is absolutely brutal. This first one is great. This is a great card. It's a great commander, and it's borderline overpowered. So next up we have Agar, the Freezing Flame, which is 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary creature giant wizard that whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls is dealt excess damage, if a giant, wizard, or spell we control dealt damage to it this turn, draw a card. For those that know me, I am a blue-red player, and my god, this card is a dream come true. I love dealing as much damage as I possibly can, and I love drawing cards. And this just wraps up my 2 loves in this game into a neat little bow. The giants in this set, and previous giants that are still legal in Brawl, make what could be a really fun deck. Giants tend to be a little bit highly costed too, so throw in the wizard for cheaper creatures, and then the spells that deal damage, and my god, do you have a card that says who all over it. This card is going to be a lot of fun to play. Also, there are a couple damage multipliers and damage adders, like Torbrand and Fiery Emancipation, in Brawl right now. So all of those will go in this deck. And this deck is going to be a lot of fun to play. I'm excited to play with this card a lot, as you can probably tell. And next up, we have Firja, Judge of Valor, which is 5 mana for a 2/4 flying lifelink. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So this seems like a perfect commander for a removal tribal deck. Decks like that tend to run a lot of cheaper spells that remove things efficiently, and this would be a good use for that. Also, being in black and white, you can use Reanimator type cards. Normally second spell and a turn abilities use blue and red, and those are the colors that get back instants and sorceries, so you can't do that with this card. But using creatures that remove your opponent's threats seems like the best way to go with this, and then just reanimating your creatures. Could be a fun deck to play, but the deck I just described could be miserable to play against, so just beware when you see this. Next up we have Herald, King of Skemfar, which is 3 mana for a 3/2 menace that when it enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an elf, warrior, or Devar card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on bottom of your library in a random order. So this just goes as another black-green elf tribal creature. You could also take it as a warrior. Keep in mind that warriors was one of the tribes for party in Zendikar Rising. You could get some use out of that, but I don't see this being ran as a commander too often, especially with Tavar being a better payoff for what this is already trying to do. I don't see this getting much play as a commander. It would definitely go in the deck of any black-green elf deck, but probably not at the helm. Alright, next up we have Cardor, Doom Scourge, which is 4 mana for a 4/3 legendary creature Demon Berserker. When it enters the battlefield, until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. And then its second ability says, whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is a really bizarre card to print in a standard legal format. First of all, it blatantly references a player other than you, which seems immensely out of place. And then on top of that, each opponent losing 1 life and you gaining 1 life seems like an odd choice for a card that has red in it. But other than the multiplayer aspect and the color pie breaking aspect of that, I also don't see this being a very good card to play as a commander anyway. First of all, I know a lot of Brawl decks, certainly I do, and a lot of players out there probably have a couple decks that don't have creatures in them at all. And one of the hardest daily challenges to complete is the kill 15 or 25 of your opponent's creatures, because sometimes they just don't have creatures. So this commander is completely dependent on your opponent's deck, and it doesn't even have a great payoff. For forcing your opponent's creatures to attack. I don't really like this card at all. I could be wrong, but I don't see it getting much play at all. And then we have Cole, the Forge Master, which is a 2 mana, 2/2 legendary dwarf warrior that says whenever another non-token creature we control dies, if it was enchanted or equipped, return it to our hand, and creature tokens we control that are enchanted or equipped get +1/+1. This feels more just like a signpost uncommon for drafting Kaldeheim than it would be a good commander for Brawl. In a metagame that already has a Kiri, I don't see this getting much play at all. It would probably be a good card in that deck, however. Next up we have Koma, Cosmos Serpent, which for 3 generic, green, blue, is a 6/6 legendary serpent. It can't be countered, and at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Koma's Coil. And then it has sacrifice another serpent, choose one, tap target permanent, its activated abilities can't be activated this turn, or Koma gains indestructible until end of turn. Now this is an interesting design on a commander. Now it doesn't say ramp directly on it, but it is 7 mana, so we'll probably want to ramp out if we're running it as our commander. But other than that, there's not much drawback to it. Keep in mind that the 3/3 token you create happens on each upkeep. So basically, as soon as you pass turn, you're going to get at least 1 serpent out of it. And that's worst case scenario if they remove it on the spot. And it's also difficult to remove because we can sacrifice that serpent to give it indestructible. So I like this creature a lot. Also, if they don't get rid of it, it can snowball out of control real quick. It attacks for 9 power the turn after it comes on the battlefield. It can also help get rid of blockers with the first choice of its second ability. I like this card a lot. It is really unique. Also, the sacrifice cost for the second ability is any serpent, not just his serpents. So keep that in mind as you're building this deck. You might want to include other serpents, but other than that, I like this card a lot. If you manage to cast it, it's definitely going to take over games. Also, between this and Verazol, it is nice to see Simic start to get cards that just reward you for ramping, rather than commanders that ramp themselves, like Euro or Kinnan. Alright, next up we have Maja, Bredagard Protector, which is 5 mana for a 2/3 human warrior. It says other creatures we control get +1/+1, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, create a 1/1 white human warrior creature token. So I see this being a pretty used commander, especially in a Brawl format that has a Zendikar set also in it. So essentially this reads landfall, create a 1/1 creature, and the fact that itself pumps all your creatures, and this card is in green, you can get a lot of value out of this. There are tons of ramp cards in this current Brawl format, especially at the 3 or 4 mana cost, that get land onto the battlefield, and with this I can see going really wide really quickly. This card is definitely going to see play. You're definitely going to see it as a commander, and I can see it putting in a lot of work. It's a pretty cool commander. Next up, we have Morit of the Frost, which is 2 green, blue for a legendary snow creature shapeshifter. It has Changeling, and it has, you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a permanent you control, except it's legendary and snow in addition to its other types, and if it's a creature, it enters the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it and has Changeling. So this is just a generically good blue-green commander. You could take it in a lot of different ways. You can put it in a snow deck, you can put it in a tribal deck, which is probably what most players are going to do. If you want to run a tribe that isn't completely focused on blue or green, this would be a good commander for it to bring into those colors. Other than that, I don't think it's very powerful. I don't think it's going to be run a lot as a commander. Alright, and next up we have Nafri, Betrayer King, which is 5 mana for a 4/3 snow creature zombie wizard that says other snow creatures and zombies we control get +1/+1, and for 3 snow mana we can return it from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This 100% feels more like a card in the deck versus a commander, strictly unless you're going snow creatures and zombies. Otherwise, I don't really see a need to play this as the commander. There are so many better blue-black commanders out there that I don't know why you would want to run this one. But if you're looking for a zombie tribal, I suppose this is your command. Next up, we have Nico Artist, which for X white blue is a planeswalker that enters the battlefield with X shard tokens, which are enchantments that have 2 mana, sack this enchantment, scry 1, draw a card. Then for +1, up to 1 target creature we control can't be blocked this turn, and whenever that creature deals damage this turn, we return it to our hand. Its -1 says deal 2 damage to target tapped creature for each card we've drawn this turn, and it also has another -1 that says create a shard token. I'm not sure how I feel about this as a commander. I don't really know which way you would want to take this as a commander. I feel like it would be a pretty solid blue-white tempo control commander, but I'm not in love with the idea of it. I do like the design. I'm not sure I love it being a commander. It's also worth noting that this is the first non-binary planeswalker Wizards has ever come up with. So good for them. Representation is very important, and this is something I fully support. And then we have Sarulf, Realm Eater, which is a 3 mana 3/3 that whenever a permanent an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on Sarulf. Then at the beginning of our upkeep, if Sarulf has 1 or more +1/+1 counters on it, we may remove all of them and exile each other non-land permanent with CMC less than or equal to the number of counters removed this way. Wizards woke up and chose violence with this card, and I am here for it. This is a commander that encourages us to destroy their creatures and then rewards us for destroying their creatures by allowing us to exile everything on the board. This seems like it could be a really fun commander to play. However, not that fun of a commander to play against. I don't think it's overpowered, but I think it's super interesting, the reward for its abilities, specifically that second one. Keep in mind, you can also put +1/+1 counters on it yourself. I already did a video on this channel with Grakma. You could take a lot of those strategies for putting a +1/+1 counter on Grakma and apply it to Sarulf and get even more advantage out of it. I'm actually thinking about converting Grakma into a Sarulf deck. I think they can play similar, and I think that would just be a lot of fun. Next up we have Sfella, Ice Shaper, which is 3 mana for a 2/4 snow creature troll. It has for 3 mana and tapping it, we create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Monolith with tap, add 1 mana of any color. And then for 8 mana and tapping Sfella, look at the top 4 cards of our library. We may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost, put the rest on bottom of our library. So I like the idea of this, but not the execution. 3 mana every turn for a new artifact. Eventually those artifacts will pay for themselves, but it's just a lot to get that going. And then You're almost never going to get 8 mana's worth out of the spell you cast out of this. Most cards are just going to be less than 8 mana. It is nice that you are able to activate this ability anytime, so that's about the benefit you get. But other than that, I don't think adding Flash is going to make up for the mana difference in the spell you cast. So I personally don't like this card. I don't think we're going to see it a lot, but I could be wrong. People could have tunnel vision for that last ability. So next up, we have Vega the Watcher, which is 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer, spirit bird, that says whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, we draw a card. Earlier in this video, I said that I don't like when Wizards just slaps draw a card onto something and call it a card. This, however, is not that, and this I really like. This is a unique ability that we're not automatically already doing, casting something from anywhere other than our hand. It requires a little bit of workaround, and that little bit of workaround makes things so much more interesting. So this works really well with a couple mechanics that are already in this current Brawl format, primarily Adventure and Escape, as well as a plethora of other cards that allow you to cast things from exile. Also keep in mind that if this is in your deck and not your commander, you will draw a card whenever you cast your commander. That's a nice little piece of upside on a card that will probably be your commander, but might not always be. And that does it for this video. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, share with a friend to help the channel grow, hit that bell icon to make sure you get notifications about new videos to make sure you don't miss anything. I also want to give a shout out to my buddy Rob Slota for making the Who Wants to Brawl logo. He's a tattoo artist, and you can check out his Instagram by following the link in the show notes below. You can email me at whowantstobrawl@gmail.com. My Twitter is @brawlwho. I also stream on Magic Arena at twitch.tv/whowantstobrawl. Check me out on Sundays at 11 in the morning, where I stream last week or next week's deck tech. On Mondays, I stream random decks. Sometimes I do Brawl, sometimes I'll even throw in a draft. I also stream a random day of the week, or at least I try to. This is Random Games. Follow me on Twitter, and I'll let you know when I'm going to play ahead of time and what I'm going to play ahead of time. But for now, this is Who letting you know I no longer want to brawl. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.